Hi, I'm State Senator Daylin Leach, and I'm here today with a very special and timely guest. I'm here with Barbara Mancini. I first heard of Barbara when I read her story in the Inquirer and started following it online and in other media outlets. Essentially, she had a father who was 93 years old, who was ill. I'll let her tell her story, but she was charged with, in essence, facilitating his end-of-life suicide. I have a bill which would legalize that and set a protocol for that. So I was very interested in speaking to Barbara to find out what her story is specifically, and sort of thinking about how my bill could have been helpful in those circumstances, and if there's any changes to the bill that need to be made as a result of what we learn, we would do that as well. So thank you so much, Barbara, for being here. I guess the best way to start is just tell me a little bit about your father. Growing up, what he did, what your relationship was with him, and so forth. Bring us up to the point where where people started reading about in the paper.
Okay, just a little bit about my father. He was one of 12 children born into a first-generation immigrant family. He was a decorated World War II veteran. After the war, he established his own business. He was a contractor. He married my mother. He had 4 children. And he was a very independent and ambitious person. And as he got older, he developed a number of medical conditions. He had diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, kidney disease. He'd had a stroke at one point. And when he reached the age of 92, he decided to stop taking all the medicines that treated these conditions. He made that decision because it wasn't helping the quality of his life. And he discussed that with his doctor and with my family. And with the full knowledge that this decision would likely shorten his life, we all agreed to respect his decision. By the time he reached 93 years old, he was terminally ill, and he enrolled in home hospice care. He was having significant pain, and I know as a nurse that as people approach death, they often have worsening of pain or other symptoms. So my father was prescribed morphine for his pain, and on the day of the incident, my dad asked me to pass him his morphine, which was a partly filled 1-ounce bottle of liquid morphine. And I had the dosing syringe in my hand, and I passed the bottle to him. He was permitted to self-administer his medicines too. And he removed the cap and he quickly drank what was left in the bottle. Now, I knew it was probably a fairly large dose. He just told me he wanted to go to sleep. And a hospice nurse arrived later that day, and I told her he had drunk the morphine. Now, the hospice nurse and her supervisor insisted that my father be taken to the hospital to be treated for an overdose. My father had done everything he was supposed to do as far as planning for the end of his life. He had a living will, and in that living will stated he wanted no life-prolonging treatment. He had appointed me as his health care power of attorney. He had a standing do not resuscitate order. And the hospice people were aware, as well as everyone in my family, that he never wanted to go to a hospital. So I tried to assure that his wishes were respected. The hospice called 911.
How long after the swallowing of the morphine did the hospice nurse arrive?
It was several hours.
And was your father conscious at that point?
He was drowsy, but he was not unconscious. He was able to answer questions. In fact, when the paramedics arrived, they asked him if he was having any pain. And for the very first time, he said no. So he wasn't unconscious. He was in no danger of stopping his breathing.
I don't want this to be difficult for you, but just to give people a sense, because a lot of people, especially when they're younger, think, well, I mean, it's life is life, and so as long as he was alive, why would he want to end it? Is there any insight you can give us as to how difficult his quality of life was at that point?
Well, as I mentioned, my father was very independent. He was an active person. He was able to climb up onto the roof into his late 80s and fix the roof. He could build anything. He could fix anything.
Now.
Yeah. So he always valued being able to be independent. And he liked to read a lot. As his health declined, doing the things that gave his life meaning became difficult, if not impossible. So, you know, we're talking about a man who was very active, who could only walk 10 or 15 feet before he got out of breath. So his quality of life was greatly diminished, and he was having significant pain every day. He knew he was dying. He wasn't afraid of dying. He didn't want to suffer while he was dying.
And so they took him to the hospital, and how long did he survive after that?
He lived for 4 more days. He developed pneumonia very quickly. He died of pneumonia. He didn't die of a morphine overdose. A morphine overdose will cause death by stopping your breathing, and he never stopped breathing. So he survived another 4 days and had full treatment in the hospital, which is exactly what he never wanted to have. And he suffered a tremendous amount, not only physically from what was being done to him to treat this, but he knew I was in trouble. He knew I'd been arrested. So he suffered greatly from the anguish of knowing that I was in trouble because of what he did.
Now, how soon after, I guess, the hospice nurse called 911 or had him transported to the hospital, how soon after that did you know that you were in some sort of trouble?
It was immediate, because once the police arrived at the home first, and then the paramedics arrived, and the police told me then and there that I no longer had any say in what's happening to my father. So they invalidated that power of attorney. They invalidated my father's advance directives, and after my father was taken to the hospital, I was arrested then and there, in the house. No prior investigation done.
Were you brought to jail?
I was taken to the police station, where I was arrested. I was arrested in the house. They photographed me at the police station, and then I was taken before a district magistrate for an arraignment.
Okay. And then play that out a little bit. Were formal charges filed against you, and what was the course of those charges?
I was charged with aiding and attempted suicide. It's a second-degree felony in Pennsylvania. So the whole process was begun, and there were a number of continuances, because that's apparently what happens in the course of criminal prosecutions. But eventually I had a preliminary hearing, and in front of a district justice. And at the preliminary hearing, my case was bound over for trial. After that occurred, my attorney filed a petition of habeas corpus on my behalf, which is a motion to dismiss. And that case was heard in front of Jacqueline Russell, who was a Commonwealth Court judge in Schuylkill County. And after she heard both sides present their cases, she decided that there was not enough evidence to support the charge, and she dismissed the case.
And that's where it ended?
Yeah.
And what do you feel, having gone through all of this, what have you learned, and what do you think could happen to make a situation such as yours easier for people in the future?
I believe this never would have happened if my father had received adequate end-of-life care in hospice. There is currently no way for any family or dying person to determine if the hospice they're engaging provides quality care. There's no database available, no ranking. So you're on your own to try to figure out if a given hospice is going to provide comfort and relieve suffering to the dying loved one. That's a big problem.
Let me ask you, as you know, I have a bill which would allow people to make these decisions, get independent doctors to evaluate them. And if they were terminally ill, the doctor said they had less than 6 months to live, they could receive medication that would end their life at a time of their choosing. I don't want you to speculate more than you feel you can, but do you have any sense of whether, if such an option was available to your father, that he would have taken advantage of that?
I am absolutely sure that my father would have wanted that choice. Whether he actually would have taken a lethal dose under a death with dignity bill, I can't say, but I know he would have wanted the choice. Again, because he liked to be the person directing the way his life was going. He didn't want someone else making decisions for him. And there are a lot of people out there like that. I'm like that. Maybe there are people out there who want a physician or someone else making all their healthcare decisions, but there are an awful lot of people who don't. And I am very sure that death with dignity bill would have prevented this type of thing from occurring.
Well, I'm sorry you went through all of this. I know it must have been very difficult on many levels. Are there any lingering consequences to this? Did you have to pay lawyers? Did you have any interruption in your employment? Were you, what impact did this have on your life?
Well, while I was under prosecution, I was placed on unpaid leave from my job, so I lost my income. I also was placed under a gag order by the court, so I was unable to address all the things that were being said about this case. And I incurred $104,000 in legal fees. And yes, that debt is still outstanding. So, I mean, I've been able to pay some of it back, but I still have a significant debt to pay. So it had a profound impact financially, and is equally profound an impact emotionally, not only on me, but on my entire family. It was absolute misery for a year. And I was offered my job back after the charge was dismissed, and I did return to work. But, I mean, going through an unjust prosecution is, unless you've been through it, it's really hard to say how profoundly it impacts you. And I'm hoping to move beyond this someday. I'm not there yet.
Well, good luck, and I think everyone's pulling for you, and we appreciate your courage and in speaking out, not only here but in the other media outlets that you've spoken to, and hopefully some good will come of this, so other people don't have to sort of go through what you went through, and we'll have a system that's organized and fair and compassionate and gives choices to people. So thank you, Barbara. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
And thank you for being with us.